You can't hear me saying put a note in the chat, but that would be my suggestion, and we'll see what we can do. Thanks everybody for joining. I am looking to see who's in the room, and I think it's a fantastic group. I know a lot of you, and then there's some of you that I don't know, but I'm really glad to meet you, and some of you I haven't crossed paths with in a really long time. So this is a really nice reunion of sorts. I'm going to try to share my screen, and we'll see how that goes. And I'll do a presentation, and then we should have plenty of time for a conversation afterwards. I want to just say up front, there are two things that we advertised that I was going to talk about that I have realized I didn't really, the presentation doesn't really hit on, but they're still completely fair game to talk about. And in fact, if those are the things that you're here for, please do let me know, and we can have a conversation about them. One of them is transit-friendly streets. So, you know, street design and accommodating transit is a thing that we love to talk about with anyone who's interested in it. And the other one is bus stops, and particularly high amenity bus stops. So that's definitely a piece of this picture that I just have neglected to sort of put in the presentation. So if those are the reasons that you decided to come, you know, please, let's talk about them. All right, sharing my screen. Is everyone able to see the slideshow? All right, yes. I see a thumbs up.
Yeah, we got it.
All right. So our topic is Transit Forward RI 2040. That's Rhode Island's Transit Master Plan, first ever Transit Master Plan, adopted just about a year ago in December of 2020 by the State Planning Council, after a 2+ year process that included making the rounds of the state and visiting, if not directly visiting every municipality, at least visiting every region. We did invite everyone, and we did speak directly with as many municipalities as possible during the process. And this plan would be a lot the worse if we had not gotten the input that you all shared. So, so thank you for that. And sort of a quick overview of what the plan is, and why we think it's important, why we think folks should be interested in it. It's basically organized around 5 key initiatives: improving existing transit, expanding transit service to new areas, bringing a higher level of transit service to Rhode Island that we don't currently have, and that would be maybe light rail, maybe bus rapid transit, which is similar to light rail, but it's a bus-based service. And then a couple of really good sort of bread and butter things: improving access to transit. A bus stop on a road that doesn't have a sidewalk is maybe not a good thing. And then making transit service easier to use. So in terms of why we think this is important, our vision, the vision of this plan, and really RIPTA's vision, is better transit for better Rhode Island. And we believe that the data backs it up, that transit is good for the economy. It's good for our health, which in turn is good for the economy. It's good for the environment, and it improves quality of life really for everyone. So there's a whole benefits briefing book available on the Transit Forward website, which you can find at ripta.com. Transit Forward, and I'm going to share a little bit of what we see as the benefits of the plan. Really the key to accessing a lot of these, so there's some stats on the screen. The key is really frequent transit, and currently Rhode Island really does have actually a very good transit system, relatively speaking. We've looked a lot at peer communities. We cover most of the right areas at a decent level. I know that for folks who are in rural parts of the state, we can talk about that and about service coverage. But for the vast majority of Rhode Islanders, people who live in the state, there's some degree of coverage, but is the coverage, is it frequent? Often it's not particularly frequent. A bus that comes once an hour or even less than that is probably not that useful. And is the span of service, if we don't operate on the weekend, or if we don't operate in the evening or early morning, in terms of getting to work, for many people, that's just doesn't, especially service workers, that's just not helpful. So what the Transit Master Plan does essentially is it adds some new service in areas that are currently unserved, but it also adds a lot of service frequency and increases the span of service substantially. So the percentage of jobs served by frequent transit in Rhode Island would increase from 20% today to 60% when the plan is fully implemented. Implementing the Transit Master Plan would provide enhanced, better transit service to every student, every college student in Rhode Island, which is 80,000. And those are largely people who, to a significant extent own cars and are future transit users. Once we've served them well, they continue, as well as the employees of those schools. So that's a really important improvement. And then again, improving service in the off-peak, which you might be surprised to know, 60% of trips are not work trips. And this is true whether you're in your car or whether you're on the bus. We often do commute to work, but we also have a lot of other needs to be served, and those things don't happen between 9 and 5. So in terms of economic impact, direct economic impact and indirect, nationally, every $1 billion invested in transit, and again, this is like a national figure, but it scales locally. Every $1 billion invested returns $4 billion ish to the economy. So it's a natural supporter of economic development. RIPTA, by adding service, vehicles, drivers over the next 20 years, will grow as an employer, and those are green jobs. The kind of jobs that we need more of, because it's already a green service and it's becoming more so, with good wages and benefits. The better the transit service, the more we are able to support Rhode Island's business recruitment and retention efforts. Businesses value workforce mobility, and they prefer to locate where mobility options exist and are strong. And then finally, transit-oriented development for a community that's interested in increasing its mixed use development, or that's interested in smart growth. The opportunity to support transit-oriented development can return anywhere from $2 to $5 billion, according to our estimates, over the next 20 or so years. So that is that. And then in terms of just better mobility for all Rhode Islanders, and particular folks who rely on transit, the number of Rhode Islanders with access to frequent transit service is going to increase when the plan is fully implemented, from currently 8%, which is paltry, to more than 50%, or roughly 50%. And the number of jobs served by frequent transit is going to increase from 20% to 60%. And again, that frequent transit is huge, because if a bus currently comes once every 30, 40, 50 minutes, and suddenly that bus is coming every 15, 20 minutes, it's going to make the service immensely more useful and more user-friendly. You stop needing to be a reader of the timetable and planning your day around that, to being someone who can just walk out to the corner bus stop and know that within the next 10 minutes, the bus is going to come, or the train. And again, midday service is going to increase. Evening service is going to increase. Current frequency of evening service in Rhode Island is every 52 minutes on the routes where we provide it. That'll come down to 25 minutes. The number of routes that operate after midnight, there are currently 1, and there will be 19. And that, if you work in a restaurant, or in manufacturing or any number of types of jobs, is a game changer. Okay. Equity. Currently 18% of low-income Rhode Islanders have access to frequent transit. When the plan is fully implemented, that number increases to 72%. So massive improvement in the quality of service for the low-income people who rely on it most. Similarly, when you have that, you might be able to go from being a 2-car household to a 1-car household, or a no-car household. And in doing so, you save roughly $7,000. Average cost of car ownership in Rhode Island is $8,000. Average cost, annual cost of a bus pass is under $1,000. Seniors, individuals with disabilities, much better access to service, and health benefits. The ability to get to the doctor, to the pharmacy, and to not defer those preventive care measures, which people do when things are hard. Transportation is a huge barrier, and this is pretty well documented. We worked with the Department of Health on this. If it's easy to get where you need to go to get your medication, then you'll do it. If if the bus only comes on a weekday and not on the weekend, or only runs between 9 and 5, you might just decide, I don't need that medication, so I'll just postpone. And then the cost on the back end is substantially more when that person ends up in the emergency room. Environment, and I think this is the last of our benefits slides. Air quality, which is also a health issue. Greenhouse gas emissions, traffic congestion, and then health, just the health benefits of an active transportation system, all work together to help our state meet a number of goals. We do, of course, have hard climate goals that are talked about a lot at the state level and probably increasingly at the local level. The estimate for 2020 of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions is 4.2 million metric tons of CO2. Electrifying RIPTA's fleet will reduce 24,000, which, needless to say, is a drop in the bucket. We are a drop in the bucket of transportation in the state. Transit is less than 1% of all vehicle miles traveled. And so for all the talk there is about the benefits of electrifying our fleet, and the benefit is there, it's actually fairly insubstantial. We're doing it, we're excited about it. But implementing the Transit Master Plan gets us basically to 250,000 metric tons of CO2 reduced, which is more than a drop in that bucket for sure, and it's equivalent to removing about 50,000 cars from the road. And yes, people are going to continue buying electric cars, and there's a whole sort of conversation around what the right way to address climate change is, but electrifying our fleet is not the beginning and end of the story. You have to provide better service because you get a much bigger return on your investment for doing that. Okay, so back to what the plan actually does. So here's our 5 initiatives that I mentioned in the beginning. And basically, since we have a really diverse group of folks here in the room, which again, I'm super excited about, I'm sort of dividing them up. I think that they all have something for everyone, to the extent that someone moves across the state, regardless of where you live or work. If you move about the cabin, then all these things can benefit you directly before the end of the day. But essentially, improving existing services and developing high capacity transit are mostly going to be beneficial to folks in the urbanized parts of the state. I will say high capacity transit includes, to a certain extent, improving some of our regional services. So, a service that will get you from Woonsocket to Providence or Newport to Providence. But what really is going to make the difference is going to be happening in the core. However, service expansion to unserved or underserved areas, improving access to transit and making transit easier to use are definitely going to benefit folks in urban as well as rural areas. And so let's just kind of talk through all of this for a minute. So improving existing services for folks in the metro core, and especially Providence, Pawtucket, East Providence, Warwick, and Cranston, there will be, when we're done with all of the service improvements that are recommended in the plan, there will be a frequent transit network. So right now we have basically one route that meets this definition of frequent transit, and a single route is not a network, right? So the R line that runs from Pawtucket down to the Cranston line through downtown Providence runs 15 minutes, every 15 minutes from early in the morning until late at night. That is a frequent service. However, if you're transferring to another route to get where you need to go or to get back home, it's the lowest common denominator. So you have to wait until that next bus comes. It might be, depending on your timing at the transfer point, it might be a long wait. And by increasing the frequency and span of all of those routes that intersect, suddenly you have a network that is frequent, and you can reliably get through with the transfer where you need to go in a way that is no longer onerous, but is actually helpful. So creating that network is huge. Longer hours of service, weekend service. Transit priority measures are things like changing the timing of your red light signal to give a little bit of priority to the bus. These are things that shave seconds, but over the course of a day can really make a huge difference. So we're implementing that across the state. Better express bus service, which is less relevant during COVID, but it's going to come back. People commuting, longer distances on express buses. Similarly, improvements to regional commuter rail service between Providence and Boston. Improving flex service. I'm going to talk more about that on another slide. And I just double listed commuter rail. Okay, high capacity transit. So again, this is a really urban focused thing. What we mean by high capacity transit is maybe light rail, maybe bus rapid transit, and what those are both very frequent, high quality services with stations really instead of stops. A really high amenity place where you wait for the bus. You might have real-time arrival or destination signs. You definitely have seating and lighting and really quality access. Rapid bus, maybe a little less amenity on the passenger station side. More stop. Yes, seating, but the main thing with rapid bus is just the frequency of the service. And then regional rapid bus, as I was mentioning, West Bay, East Bay, Woonsocket to Providence. These are existing routes, the 54 that goes to Woonsocket, but just enhancing the frequency and doing transit priority measures to speed boarding, alighting, and to get the buses past pinch points of congestion. So maybe bus on shoulder on the highway, things like that. All right. Moving out from the core urban areas of the city to across the state. I'm going to show, I don't know why I don't have the map here, but I have a map later in the presentation that will show where in the state, based on our market analysis, are underserved areas. And the plan recommends new or enhanced local service in each of those. And there are such areas in Westerly, in Narragansett, in Newport, in Woonsocket, in West Warwick. I'm missing one or two, but and if you live and work in those places or have constituents in those places, you know this already. So that's a core, a key recommendation of the plan. Within some of those locations, as well as within the urban area, new crosstown routes. The best example of that is if you're in Warwick or Cranston and you want to get to the other side of town, you currently have to take a bus into downtown Providence and take another bus out, right? Because those cross connections don't happen. That's largely because there's not a lot of great streets, sort of roadways that connect, but where they are, the plan recommends actually making those connections and bringing in the BRT or light rail lines to the south that sort of link up is going to really help that along as well. So that's, you know, your traditional route by route bus transit, sort of on the innovative approaches side. For those of you who, you know, are in an area where there's a flex zone, you probably know that there is a flex zone. You might not have ever used the service. You might not know that that service is open to anyone, that for $2, you can book a trip in advance from your house to where, or from whatever point you want, from point to point within the flex zone. It's not just for seniors. It's not just for people with disability. It's a door-to-door service that is available to anyone that is traveling within that flex zone. The catch is you have to book it a day in advance. So we are in the process of upgrading that service with the pilot hopefully starting later this year to an on-demand service. It's probably going to pilot in West Warwick first, and hopefully that'll be successful and we can expand from there. And then you would have the ability to hail the ride, book, pay for the ride all through your smartphone in a much more user-friendly way than is currently true. And then establishing a network. Okay, so this is the one, and this is what the illustration is on the slide. That's a mobility hub, and we currently sort of have one in our downtown at Kennedy Plaza, in as much as you have you know, buses connecting, bus service connecting, you have good shelters, you have good information, you have real-time signage. But the additional amenities that you might find if you were designing a mobility hub, and the plan recommends more than a dozen of them across the state, is you would add whatever amenity your local area is interested in. So here we have bike and scooter share, we have Amazon lockers, this is in the picture. You have a kiosk that shows how to, you know, navigate sort of your key destinations around town. You have electric vehicle charging. You have coffee, because everyone needs a coffee kiosk when you're waiting for the bus, or you know, you're about to go on a bike ride and you need a little extra energy to get home. So these are completely scalable. Kennedy Plaza obviously is a massive downtown, you know, state capital size one, minus some of these amenities. You can have a village scaled mobility hub. And it's just a question of carving out a little place to put it, deciding what amenities you prefer to have there. and making it happen, which we love getting grants to make things happen. So, and then finally, partnering. I think especially in the lower density parts of the state, part of the solution is really going to be working together, one, to figure out what the priorities are, who needs to go where, like what are the gaps, and then to figure out sort of creatively how to fund things and make them happen. Because of course, resources are limited, but it certainly doesn't mean that things that should happen can't happen. It just takes sort of that effort of partnering. Okay, access to transit. This is sidewalks, ADA accessibility, park and ride, which is still a thing, and making sure that those sorts of areas are accessible and have the amenities that people want to be comfortable, so that they're attractive. Increasingly having bicycling related improvements, bicycle parking, incorporating your transit planning and your bike planning all together into your complete streets planning is really huge. And then again, partnering, working with employers, with healthcare providers, with community centers, and really anyone who's interested in having alternatives for their clients, their customers, their employees, to talk about how you can do, maybe it's fare subsidies, or maybe it's creating a shuttle that everybody works together to plan and fund. By the way, RIPTA has a van pool program that fits into this as well. So we really are interested in facilitating all of these kinds of conversations for anyone who's interested. Oh, and one of the mechanisms for having those conversations is through a transportation management association. There's lots of great models out there. They're usually regional. They're usually about connecting people within the region, and sometimes, people in the region to whatever the employment center is, whether that's Providence or Quonset. So just a tool to have in the toolkit. All right, so this is the last of the 5, making transit easier to use. Hopefully most folks have heard of Wave. This is our new fare payment system. Includes some really nice benefits, both in terms of having you can have your account connected to your credit card or however you want to do it, so that it just automatically reloads. Fare capping is fantastic. If you wouldn't normally get a monthly pass because you might not make enough trips in a month, you don't have to get one. But as you buy your trips, once you hit the cost of a monthly pass, you stop paying, and any trip after that is free, because the system has these thresholds. Same with a daily pass. If you're a tourist, or if you're just out and about for the day, you're showing your relatives around, you're not sure you would get your money's worth out of a day pass, doesn't matter. You spend down on the Wave account, and as soon as it hits the day level, you don't pay anymore. And these are things that are built in, that are benefits. Other ways to make transit more user-friendly. We are so not talking enough about bus stops, but we are currently preparing to do a comprehensive bus stop signage improvement program. So the little square or rectangle or sign that says RIPTA on it, that you now see attached to a telephone pole or maybe even a tree, at any given location throughout the state, doesn't tell you what the route is. It doesn't tell you, how frequently the bus comes. It tells you nothing, except that this is a bus stop, and you hope that it really is, and the bus will come eventually. All that goes away to be replaced by really good high quality signage that actually gives you the information that you need about what routes serve this location, and maybe with even like a link to additional information, or at least you would then have the ability to get on your smartphone and look up the details for that service to find out if this is really where you want to be at the time. So that's coming. and fare integration with the MBTA, with GATRA and CERTA, which are the bus services across the border in Massachusetts, perhaps ultimately with Amtrak. All these things take time. Everyone's on their own fare payment system. So, but ideally what you get at the end of the day is not just fare integration for the transit services, but mobility as a service, which includes every other kind of mobility service. It could include your bike share, it could include your car share, it could include any number of just all of your mobility options, so that you just have it all right there in one account on your phone. And you can walk out your door in the morning without having to worry about how you're going to get around and how you're going to pay for it and having to use 8 different apps to book it all. It's just all right there. Okay. We are more than halfway for anyone that is looking at the clock. We're a good bit more than halfway. Here's the maps I referenced earlier. I just want to share these because this sort of explains why certain recommendations are in the geographic locations they are. So what this map shows is where people go, mostly driving. This is all modes, and most of the travel is by car on any given weekday. And quite clearly, it's a very Providence-centered flow of travel that we have in the state. And it sort of, you know, spiders out from there. Huge sort of concentration of trips, and these are mostly work trips. Again, it's average weekday between Providence, Warwick, and Cranston. More than half of the workers in these 3 cities commute daily within those 3 cities. They're not going out or beyond. And that's almost 100,000 workers, and 20% of all of Rhode Island's sort of daily travel. So if it feels like we're emphasizing a lot in this part of the state, this is why. There's really a huge concentration of trips that are happening there. But also you see, you know, Narragansett, Woonsocket, there's a lot else that's happening. It's just the huge concentrations in the center. Similarly, and this takes into account, this transit demand estimating takes into account various sort of census and economic and demographic factors. So it includes people who are more likely to use transit, not just people, you know, where people are going. And we included Fall River. We do have service that runs through Fall River now, connecting from Newport to Fall River to Providence. That was an addition of a couple of years ago, and it's been really successful. The darker the color, the higher the demand for transit. And you do see it comes pretty significantly south of Providence. You know, Warwick, Cranston, West Warwick, all the way sort of bleeding into Coventry. So that's sort of been over the last few decades. There's been a lot of growth in that direction. And as this map shows, these kind of purplish areas are really underserved. So we have a lot of catching up to do in the southern part of the metro area. So around Quonset, Newport, Narragansett, South Kingstown, Westerly, Woonsockets, all we have recommendations for additional local services in all of those areas. Not gonna sort of go through all the detail on this because it's essentially everything that we've talked about so far is what's recommended for the northern half of the metro area. There's a lot. I will say for the southern half of the metro area, really the game changer is these 2 red lines that are coming down, one darker red and one lighter red. The one to the east that connects from downtown to the airport, the lighter red line, is recommended to be a bus rapid transit corridor with roughly 10, not less than 15-minute service all day. So linking from, you know, the financial core area down to the airport, and then hooking over towards CCRI in Warwick. The darker red line on the west, we have just received planning funds through the RAISE program, which was the Tiger program, and then it was the BUILD program, and now it's RAISE. Significant resources to start planning this service. So this is for real. Don't know yet. One of the things to be determined during this planning effort is whether this will be bus rapid transit or light rail. The plan decided not to suggest what the mode would be, but in either case, it would be a 10-minute service connecting all the way from Central Falls, which is one of our most transit-dependent communities in the state, down through Warwick and Cranston to CCRI and the malls and the whole set of destinations that are there, which is huge. And if you're a student at CCRI and you live in Central Falls, what used to be close to an hour-and-a-half trip would be reduced to somewhere between probably 35 and 45 minutes, every 10 minutes, all day long. And then looking across the whole state, the new local routes that I mentioned, upgrading flex service to an on-demand service, possibly expanding or changing some of those boundaries. That would be a conversation with the communities, some additional study. Creation of mobility hubs. This is the one that we really would love. In fact, with the city of Woonsocket, we have applied for planning funds to create a mobility hub. There have not gotten word on whether that funding is going to come through, but fingers crossed. It's a great project, and it would be a good model. We'll probably be developing in the next year or two, like a guidebook to sort of share with folks about what you would need to do to prepare for one, what things to consider, who to talk to, how to choose your amenities, how to choose a location, and sort of that whole toolkit. There's some good examples out there. San Diego has a great one, but we need one that is Rhode Island specific. And so we'll be working on that. And then service partnerships. So again, we have a planner who focuses specifically on human services transportation planner, who works closely with the senior centers around the state and community organizations that provide transit transportation services. And if there's a way that we can help identify locations where folks could transfer from the local services to RIPTA, you know, if there's links that we're missing, let us know, and we're happy to have those conversations. Seasonal and special event services is something that we've always done. COVID is not, you know, super helpful on that front, but when when we're allowed to do more festivals, we're happy to do more event service as it makes sense. And then creating hubs that are regional. So I don't know, I didn't mention this earlier, but at both URI and CCRI, there are hubs in development, transit centers where service can be anchored sort of regionally. Again, just kind of strengthening or de-strengthening the central downtown Providence focus and creating separate centers around the state. Okay, last few slides. What we're doing right now. We've already approved a new route, 16. Would likely have put this into service now in January, but except that it is, I'm sure that everybody knows that there are a lot of shortages in a lot of places, not just of materials, but of employees. So, you know, restaurants, manufacturers, we are short of operators pretty significantly. Our bus orders are also delayed. COVID is not helping at all. Hopefully when we do our summer service changes, this can go into effect, but it has been through the public hearing process. And it's a route that runs, I think, from Warwick down to CCRI, covers a lot of areas that have been really underserved. And there was a lot of excitement when we took that to the public. Most of you already know about Pawtucket Central Falls train station that was already underway. as the planning process was happening, but it's nearly done. So it's going to really change the way things work within the next year or so. The planning for the high capacity transit south of Providence. RIDOT is doing some assessments to see if they can build transit improvements into their own capital planning as they do repaving and roadway improvements. I've mentioned the bus stop signage. What I didn't mention is that we also are going to launch a shelter program that is going to, one, improve the quality of all shelters, and two, add a large number of shelters throughout the state. That's not fully funded yet, but when we went on the road to do the transit master plan, folks really wanted better bus stops, and part of what they wanted was some shelter, and they're not wrong. So pursuing funding, there's a lot of federal funding available. A lot, the IIJA is going to bring increased funding levels, which is fantastic. There's discretionary grants that we are pretty successful in pulling down. One of the tricks, and the state has been fantastic about matching those grants. There's always a local match. The bigger challenge is going to be the local support for the operating costs, which is not insignificant when you're increasing service levels from 45 minutes to 15 minutes on multiple routes in the span of service. There's a lot of cost with that. The federal government doesn't necessarily pay. So we're gonna make the case for that as we go, and are always happy to have the support of municipalities and partners. And there will be a conversation right out as well, just to look for long-term transportation funding as the gas tax dwindles, as folks move to electric vehicles, all sorts of shifts out there. So, and in that conversation, definitely the ask for increased funds to support implementation of this plan is part of the picture. I mentioned the benefits briefing book, that and the plan itself, and lots of other resources are available here at RIPTA.com. Partnership programs. I've talked a lot about partnership already, so I think I'm gonna move along because there's only 2 more slides and I wanna then get to questions. And these are, I think, the most fun for a League of Cities and Towns audience. What can cities and towns do that are interested, or what do we hope that you would do? So everyone has a comprehensive plan with a transportation or a circulation or mobility section. Build the transit master plan into that, as appropriate for your community. If you're doing complete streets planning and you do have bus service in your community, really think about what that means. Yes, pedestrian, yes, bicycle, but and there's tension points. I know. I've worked in as a downtown planner in the past, and I understand that like buses are big and not always the thing that you want sort of dominating, but there are really good ways to incorporate transit into your complete streets, and we would love to sit down and work with folks. We do also have a bus stop design guidebook that's available, that's really helpful about sort of siting and accessibility requirements and best practices. So mobility hubs, seriously, if anyone is interested in talking about a mobility hub, we would love to talk about that. Especially, I think, if there is a flex zone in your community, if you have senior transportation services or community transportation services, I think there's amazing opportunities there that we should explore. Development approvals. It's very hard for transit service to be incorporated after the project is designed and the approvals have been made. Shopping centers, business parks, housing developments, especially the big ones, supportive housing, senior housing, medical facilities. if they can be designed and approved so the bus can get in and out, the people who use that, who live or work or access those developments will be very grateful. It's, I think, still going to be a while before there's another round of TIP project solicitations, but we love projects that improve access to bus stops, whether it's, sidewalk, anything that helps build out our multimodal transportation system. So just think about that as you're doing your planning. Some of you may know the 880 principle, which is basically that if you design for everyone from an 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, then it's going to be great for everyone else as well. And so 8-year-olds and many 80-year-olds aren't drivers yet or anymore. And so, how do you make sure that your community is friendly to those people as well? How do they get to the store? How do they get around town? What if their child or their parents, isn't able to drive them everywhere they need to go? Maybe they want more freedom to be able to get around. And then lastly, the town next door. Talk to your neighbors. And I've had some conversations with some of you about this in the past. Is there something next door that your residents, your seniors can't really access because your local transportation stops at the town limits? Can we work together to think of a way to get folks across those lines? And this is maybe where mobility hubs can come into play. Not always the easiest, but I think worthy challenges to consider. And that's it. Sorry, I know that was long. I appreciate your patience. Holy moly, it was long. But I would love to, any questions, any thoughts, and especially the challenging ones. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and there we go. Thank you. Gordon, you have your hand up? Nope.
How you doing? Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So there's going to be a lot to unpack because I have a lot of statements, a lot of questions. And those of people that know me sometimes get annoyed. I see my colleague on here, Senator Connell. I am speaking, I am a DPW director for the town of Forster, but I'm largely going to be speaking as a senator that sits in a lot of these hearings when a lot of the RIPTA stuff comes in front of us. And I am an advocate for my 4 towns, and I'll use Forster as a historical backdrop of more knowledge of Forster than Coventry, West Greenwich, and Situate and Forster that I represent. But those towns also have the same issues that the other Western towns like Exeter, Hopkinton, Richmond deal with. We all know public transportation is public funded, whether it's about federal dollars or our state dollars. And again, I'll drill it down to Forster. What bus, all the people in the town of Forster and my other districts pay taxes to RIPTA and pay funds for RIPTA to operate. How many public transit buses come into the town of Forster? Do you know the answer to that?
Forster is unserved.
Should be 0.
So that's the recommendation, and I do not have access to, and we've looked at it, the dollars and cents. It's tricky with the gas tax, the way it's collected and the way it's distributed. And one of the challenges is and because of that, and not just because of that, because of the way service is designed, it's not a one-to-one or a dollar for dollar reallocation. But the recommendations for mobility hubs, the recommendations for service projects are what the planning efforts resolved were the ways to try to address that. So there's not an unwillingness to bring resources. The question is how to bring resources in a way that's really effective.
Okay, but
and
again,
I think Greg Nordine is here as well, and he's our Chief of Strategic Advancement, and I'm sure he'd be happy to join the conversation.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Greg. And I emphasize this on an equity issue. In today's society, in the position I'm in, I can't tell you how many times if I had a quarter for every time something was thrown at me with a word of equity. So when I have an opportunity to take all those quarters, put it into a big roll and throw it back, I throw it back. And I constantly use that opportunity when every one of my constituents are paying for RIPTA, and the equity in any form does not come back for the representation on the money that's taken from them. I will use a couple examples. One of my constituents in Scituate is wheelchair bound. There is limited public transit that comes to Scituate, which I like and is okay, but he has to go a step further and utilize rideshare to get to the bus stop. But there's a rule out there: if you don't reside within 1 mile of a public bus pickup, rideshare will not transport you if you're outside that 1 mile. So there is no equity there. I'm sure you can't throw a rock in Providence, Warwick, Cranston without hitting a bus stop within 1 mile, within the entire city. So those rules are unfair on that level. The answer to Foster is we have zero bus transportation. We have seniors that need it, not only possibly to go to the doctors, go on the weekends, but we need transportation out here. All those rural communities are adversely affected. I use this as an argument. We're being treated differently. We're treated unequally, and I'm probably putting some bills in other manners that will allow the rural communities to benefit in ways of repairing their roads because of the lack of public transportation, and we wholly rely on our roads. And where we get those funds, we're going to have to figure it out. And I will use the argument that we're paying all this money for RIPTA and we're not getting it, so we should get some of that back. The other point I wanted to make is, and I'll bring this back to Foster, as being a resident basically my whole entire life. Do we know how many buses used to come to the state line in Foster 40 years ago in the 80s when I was in school? At least 4 or 5 a day to the Connecticut state line on Route 6. Moving forward, I know this is a plan that we're trying to plan forward. The town of Foster, I hate to keep using that as an example, but we're going to be putting a public safety building up on Route 6 at the intersection of our local elementary school, which the state, to me, I don't know why, I never see people crossing the road, did the crosswalks in, probably because it's within a vicinity of a school. It's required by the funding if they get to repair the road. They put in public crosswalk, they put in wheelchair ramps, but it's kind of like the bridge to nowhere because it's not being used. Again, right across the street, we're going to be building a new police station that was passed. And here's the opportunity, but the odd part about it is because we have no buses coming, it would be smart for us to build the infrastructure for electric vehicles charging, a bus canopy, parking for public parking that maybe the bus RIPTA could rent, or we could provide it, so many parking spots. But to put all this infrastructure in, which is what you guys are promoting to do for a bus that may never come, is confusing to us. I can pinpoint several areas in the town of Foster, Route 101. The state owns the property at the Connecticut state line off of 101 that they used to have as a public park, and as all we know, things have going different directions, and it's just used for nothing now, and it's all grown in. That could be a public place that the state owns for parking, much like you have down at exit 1 for parking where a bus can go. And I'm not talking about big buses coming into the town because we may not have enough to fill a bus up, but a small bus could be done in the rural areas that would help us out.
So,
But I said, at the end of the day, it's getting to the point where we're going to need to start getting some of that money back that we've invested, and we've lost services. It's not like, oh, we're going to expand out into these areas. You were out in these areas for years and years and years and years, and then you can get back to the inner cities, but you're taking more money from us as you do that. That's all. I know it's a lot to unpack, but it's something I do in committee and I do on the floor.
Thank you.
So just to try to respond to that, so first of all, you're absolutely right that Foster does not have any transit service today. And if we served it in the 80s, I apologize if I don't know the answer specifically to what services were there back in the 80s. But if we served it there in the 80s, those services were discontinued long before anybody at RIPTA that's working here now made those decisions to do that. So, but the reason we cut service is not because we don't want to serve a community. The reason service is reduced is because, quite frankly, it's a series of trade-offs, and we have sort of two functions as an agency that we're trying to complete or trying to achieve. The first is to move as many people as possible, getting them out of their cars, and the second is to make sure that we're providing as much geographic coverage as we possibly can. But those two things are sometimes at odds, quite frankly. The communities you're speaking about, Foster, Hopkinton, Scituate, those are communities that are relatively low density and don't have a ton of potential ridership that would support sending out regular fixed route service on a regular basis without some sort of significant investment. The idea that the state is actively supporting adding transit there, or that there's taxpayer dollars, RIPTA doesn't receive a penny of general revenue from the state. All of our money is coming from gas tax. You know, we receive no resources from there's not a single municipality in the state that contributes to our operational expenses either. We are, despite all that though, we are actively looking at ways to increase transit access in the communities that you've listed, including supplying vans to the town so that people can. We've actually worked with Rep Chippendale on getting vans out into those communities so that that's red crimp in that because we are in hands at the moment, but we've actually got a program in development specifically targeted as part of this master plan that doesn't involve us sending out massive 40-foot buses to rural communities to have them run empty. We're being flexible and working specifically with getting smaller or working specific towards getting smaller vehicles to provide more flexible services at the town's discretions and needs. And doing so in a way that is cost effective. But I mean, categorizing this as that we're actively not trying to serve those communities is just a misrepresentation of what we're doing. It's just a different type of need. But anyways.
Two points on it. I do understand it. Don't take me the wrong way. I was also involved with the public transit on the bus coming from RIPTA. I was down at your facility when we were looking at the high cube and everything else. So I was involved with that also on a state level and a local level, being a highway director. But again, you talked about the gas tax. I could venture to guess that the rural areas, because it's farther for them to go to work, are disproportionately funding the RIPTA more than somebody who lives on Cranston Street that has an opportunity for public transit and works on Union Ave 3 miles away, whether they want a car drive or they want a public transit. So again, you just rolled right into the inequity part of we're paying.
I would just add to that, we operate.
And if I could finish, the other point is the bus that does come is going to help the seniors. But what we need out here in all these rural communities is at least 1 or 2 of the buses that where they can get to that, have the bus stop there, and then segue into Providence or Cranston where they have the ability to meet the main hub. Yes, the little bus, RIPTA bus coming for human services in the town of Worcester for the seniors will be helpful to go from here to the senior center or to a doctor's appointment. But once you put that in, it's also important to get the transit on a couple buses a day to get them to the urban areas that will assist that. And like I said, there'll be facility going up in Forster where we can work with you to put that up. But again, the important reason why I said it is we don't want to build all that infrastructure if a bus isn't going to come. Planning and timing and doing that. So we need to work together, and it needs to be a little bit more than, sorry to say it, but as a senator, throwing a potato chip out in rural areas to say, hey, we did something for you. I'm going to
I would just encourage you as a senator, you're in a position.
And this is me speaking as a state senator, as I do in committee, shooting from the hip. Please don't take it the wrong way, but that's how it's almost seems like out here.
Well, fair enough. But as a senator, you are in a position then to help us, because quite frankly, everything you're asking for, we would love to provide it, but there's got to be the resources in place to support it.
Understood. And sometimes you have to cut other areas to transfer that money to other areas to make it a little more equitable. I see that every single day on the Senate floor where we cut from other areas to take others. So I'm willing to sit down and find a way to do that, earmark some funds for that. But I'm here for the 4 towns that I represent, and I can't emphasize enough that we're not being equitably fair when it comes to that on what we spend.
There is no part of the state that is receiving transit service that is in excess of what it needs that I would suggest we cut service from. The whole point of this master plan is that the dollars we receive today are the whole point of this master plan is the state needs more transit, period. That is a pretty much a universal baseline we established in this process. There is not enough money coming into transit today to support the state as it is. So suggesting that we start cutting service elsewhere, that is just, the answer isn't just reallocating the funds. The answer is that this transit needs more of an investment from the state, period. There's not enough to go around. I look at us as an agency. One thing Sarah didn't hit upon in her presentation, we carry more passengers than the city of Indianapolis. We carry more passengers than the city of Kansas City. We carry more passengers than many transit agencies that are actually small, that are actually in bigger cities than us, but we do so with less resources. We carry more passengers than Salt Lake City, who is spending about twice as much as they are on transit, or as we are on transit as an area. It's not that we aren't. That there's excess transit that needs to be reallocated. Is that transit, quite frankly, is underfunded in this state.
And again, my last statement will be, also, I was a town council member for quite a few years operating with a budget and knowing how funding works, municipal, statewide, and everything. When I said either cut or do or reallocate, there's only 2 ways when you're dealing with federal, state, and town dollars to increase something. It's either 1, increase taxes, or 2, find it elsewhere within the budget or somebody else's budget to reallocate that, which again, I will try and work with that on the state level, but that's just reality. And again, I still think, and I don't know if you've admitted, but the rural areas are being treated unequitably with the bus transportation. That's the final thing I have.
Yep. So it does look like there's some other questions on other topics. I do think we should, I am happy to continue in a separate forum, the rural conversation. It's really important. But for Joanna in the chat has a question about flex zones. So, and we would love to hear other sorts of questions as well. So RIPTA has, I think, 7 flex zones around the state in different, in Newport, Middletown, Narragansett, South Kingston, West Warwick, Woonsocket, Westerly, and they are, gosh, I could pull up the map again, but basically they're shown on the maps as sort of geographic regions that are carved out, within which there is a RIPTA van service that can be scheduled, that is open to anyone traveling within that zone. And so the trick is, if you're not traveling within that zone, then it doesn't help you. But if you are, it's open to anyone. It's $2 per trip, and you can schedule it the day before by calling RIPTA customer service, and it is very heavily used in Woonsocket, more lightly used in some of the other communities But it's kind of actually a little bit of a best kept secret. And we pre-COVID were doing a lot of outreach to sort of help answer, your question for folks. So, and we're really looking forward to when we do the pilot later this year for the on-demand service to kind of see how that goes, and get feedback from folks on a same day. It's still going to have some limitations in terms of the number of vehicles that serve the zone, but it's the kind of thing you wish you could offer it statewide, but it's a big state considering that we're a small state. So within the smaller zones is kind of what we're able to do at this point. And it does serve lower density areas. Burrillville does have a flex zone, and it connects over towards Woonsocket, and it's a good resource. In terms of mobility hubs, so I think actually what the center was describing is an interesting example. So you have an area that's going to be a public facility. It has some space around it. It's on a highly traveled corridor. I think, often mobility hubs, as they've been developed around the country and in other countries, have tended to be most successful when they're in sort of a downtown or a village center or very near, so that it's a walkable area. But it really can be what makes the most sense for a community. I think an ideal sort of pilot for a mobility hub would be so the Woonsocket proposal that is pending funding is in downtown Woonsocket. So it's served by fixed route. It's also served by a bike path. It's proximate to City Hall and the Higher Education Center. And folks also can access it from the flex zone. So folks who are within the flex area, but not on a bus route directly, can use flex to get to the bus zone, to the bus route, into downtown, to the mobility center, and make their transfers and sort of do what they need to do and then get back. So it really, there's been some discussion in East Bay about establishing a mobility hub near a senior center that offers senior transportation, that also could be within a flex zone so people can make transfers. It's a conversation we can have. Sort of really should depend on the specifics of the local area. Are there other questions? Okay. I don't think so. Jennifer, are we able to hear you? For Talia in Hopkinton, I think you have a good question about growing ridership and yeah, obviously you're not going to grow ridership where you're not offering service. What we're going to look closely at is where we do introduce new routes. We're going to look at the uptake of those services, and where we provide increased frequency, we're going to look carefully at the uptake there. And whenever, and we have in the last couple of years, even during COVID, we've increased service frequency on certain routes, and ridership grows definitely. So in the underserved areas, as we add service, we do expect that ridership will grow. And if we, together determine that we've missed an area, whether in Hopkinton or elsewhere, we look at that and perhaps add service, but it does have to be, it does have to be funded. So I thank everyone for their time today and for their interest. And we can make the slides available. It has our contact information there. We're happy to continue the conversation. We do have a planner who focuses specifically, I think I mentioned this, on transportation for seniors and individuals with disabilities. We do coordination with that, with agencies, other state agencies and CAPS and organizations from around the state. It's an ongoing conversation for us. We're working hard on it. We care about it. We're looking for creative ways to get it funded. And, you're not going to give up the fight and neither are we. We want to make it happen. We want the same thing. So thank you again for your time. And I guess that's it.